Good day, madam. My name is Lim Wei Yi and my matching number is 261307. Today I'm going to present our second CBD process model, which is X model. As you can see from the diagram, the X model is named as X because the shape of the model is constructed in a X ladder. In this model, it consists of 4 development perspectives, which are the development for reuse, development after modification, development without modification, and the component-based software development. The components that are going to use in this model can be found or selected from the TCR, which stands for the Test-Able Component Repository, or from the RCR, which indicates the Reusable Component Repository. This model is highly used in the large software development as it is mainly focusing on the reusability by building the reusable components for the software development and building software from simple and reusable components to increase the quality and the productivity of the component-based software. Well, firstly, I will start with the development for reuse. In this development, it is aimed to develop the components or services that will be reused in other applications in future. In this development, it consists this process. Firstly, in the software analysis and specification, the features and behavior of the software will be described in depth and the software requirements will be specified by the software analyst. Also, in this stage, the functional and non-functional requirements of the system will also be defined via the analysis of the existing software components. Besides that, the software analyst will also produce a document which specifies the overview of the project scope, objectives, and the schedule. Also, an initial risk assessment activities will also be conducted during this stage. Well, next, to the process of design. In this stage, the software components are designed and constructed based on the specified requirements that the software analysts have defined during the first stage. To save time, the software designer will search the reusable components available in the TCR, which is the Testable Components Repository, and also RCR, which is Reusable Components Repository, to select the optimal components before the designer starts to design the overlook of the software components. Well, fortunately, if the software designer found a suitable reusable component from the repositories, the software designer will design the component interaction and construct the component specification. Otherwise, the software designer needs to take time to create a new design for the software component that is reusable in the future. Well, proceed to the next stage, which is coding and achieving. In this stage, the software developer will write the codes according to the design that has been defined during the design stage to reach the project goals based on the principles of component-oriented programming, such as the separation of interface and implementation, programming language independence, and component-based security, to ensure that the developed components are productive and highly reusable in every application securely. Later on, the codes will be achieved for the usage of testing and future reference. Well, next, in the component testing stage, the component tester will verify and validate the developed components and their source code based on the test plan checklist and also implement the test architecture to ensure that the components are ready to be delivered. Well, if the components are testified with a positive result, the components will be stored in the Test-Able Component Repository, which is TCR. Well, next, we will move to the development with reuse. In this development, it consists of 2 developments as development after modification and development without modification. While the difference between both developments is the modification of the components. If the software developer wants to modify the components, he will be involved in the processes of the development after modification. In contrast, if the software developer wants to reuse the components directly without any modification, the software developer will undergo processes that consist in the development without modification. Well, first I will start with the development after modification. As you can see from the diagram, it consists of the 4 stages. At first, in the stage of select component according software analysis, specification and design, the software researcher will undergo a component selected from the TCR to select the components that are already being developed and highly testable. And later on, the selected components will be modified according to the software requirements and the design structure to increase the interoperability of it in the system. In addition, the software researcher can apply 2 algorithms during the component selection, which are the simple component selection problem and criteria-based component selection problem to ensure that the composition of the selected components fulfill the objectives and the requirements of the software. Next, in the stage of evaluate and adaptability, the selected components will be evaluated based on their capability and adaptability to fit in the system architecture design. While the software developer will also evaluate the selected component based on the requirement to ensure that the components are highly scalable. Later on, we will proceed to the stage of the component wrapping and archiving. In this stage, the software developer will wrap the evaluated components by isolating them with other components by using a wrapper. The usage of the wrapper is to identify whether the interoperability and compatibility of those components can be tested independently and easily in the component testing phase without affecting the functionality of other existed components. After the software developer have wrapped the selected components, the components will be achieved as a reference for future use before sending them to the testing phase. While similarly, in the stage of component testing, the process will undergo the similar process that we have mentioned in the component testing stage of the development for reuse. Later on, the tested component will be saved into the TCR. Next, we will proceed to the development without modification. At first, in the stage of domain analysis and specification, the main goal of this stage is to analyze the information collected to employ and reuse the existing components. To achieve the goal, the software analyst will undergo the process of analyzing the existing domain application to understand the background information of the domain via the development histories and the knowledge captured from the domain experts. Next, in the stage of domain engineering, the software developer will reuse the domain knowledge and then search and select the existing components from the RCR based on the requirements defined in the domain models. Later on, in the stage of frameworking, the software developer will generalize the selected components and move them into the framework environment by removing the components which are not important or relevant to the system work. While later on, we will proceed to the component testing stage, and the process will undergo the same process that we have discussed in the component testing of the development for reuse. And then, the components will be saved into the TCR. Well, finally, we will proceed to the component-based software development. At the stage of the assembly, the software developer will assemble the test-able components from the 3 development processes which have saved their components in the TCR. Next, we will proceed to the stage of system testing. In this stage, the software tester will apply usability testing on the component to identify the flexibility of the function provided and the interoperability of it with the other assembled components. In addition, the functional testing may also participate in this stage as well, as it can provide a checklist for the software tester to check on the completeness of the component's functionality. Next, in the stage of implementation and deployment, the software developer will integrate the assembly components into the system. And then the software developer will deploy and finalize the system to the user and ensure that the user requirements are fulfilled. While last but not least, in the stage of maintenance, the software developer may be required to modify or update the system if there is any faults appear in the system. While after the maintenance has been done, the reusable components will then be stored in the RCR repository for the future use. Well, to understand the comparison between V model and X model, we have prepared a table which consists of the activities that consist in the V model and X model. Well, actually both models are very similar because many common activities are involved in both models, except for the activities of the component search and component evaluation. In V model, it does not consist of the component search, but it consists in the X model. Furthermore, both models do not consist the component evaluation activities. Well, that's all for the explanation on X model. Thank you.